Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Early Effect, the show where you get to hang out in a conversation with your friends without having to participate. Today, we are talking about the other podcast I've been developing, The Devil You Don't Know. Spoiler alert, I am not a devil worshiper. Sorry.
Don, how you doing, man?
I'm good. The wife is back in town. She was out for a week, so it's kind of good to have the structure at home back the way it was.
No longer the solo parent?
Yeah. I am terrible at it. I'm absolutely terrible at it. I only have one kid, and I cannot juggle all the things. It's ridiculous, and it's sad. It's sad.
What's the one thing that you felt like you forgot the most?
Dinner.
That's amazing.
Planning dinner and just, ugh.
Well,
I didn't give up. We ate like shit the whole week.
Congratulations on getting your second brain back then.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. So.
Hey, your fire is all over you, by the way, in the background. Like this whole place does not look fine. It looks very, very unfine.
Yeah, I like your cartoon version.
Thank you. I would like to think that everything I do is a cartoon version, and if it's not, I try to make it that way. So I appreciate that.
That's a fantastic way to approach things. I'm going to remember that. Going forward, that's kind of your MO. I think that's going to help visualize what you're going for.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, that's dead on for that one. But yours isn't. So tell me why is everything on fire behind you in a not cartoon version?
Oh, are you talking about the podcast?
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, sure. So, I was watching the TV show Lucifer. It's on Netflix.
Good show.
Jerry Bruckheimer. Cindy and I just started it. We're just into season 2 now.
Oh man.
And just loving it. It's fun. It does have a bit of that CW feel, sort of the supernatural formula, but it's pretty good world building, and it's Neil Gaiman's Lucifer from Sandman.
Yeah,
to go wrong with that. And I don't have any idea what's going to happen, so it's kind of really interesting. And so then it really got me interested in the lore around Lucifer, and I really appreciated the approach that the show takes with Lucifer being this sort of rebellious child and tossed out for not doing what his dad wanted, and then sort of designated as like grand jailer of evil shit in hell and overseeing the torture of evil people, and then juxtaposing that against the absolutely gobsmacking idea that Lucifer himself is not evil.
Right.
That blew me away. That concept never entered my mind. And so you have this character who is all about the truth. Like, to a fault, he's all about the truth, which I love because that's so reflective of the character that I have sort of studied over the years in theology and the Bible and whatnot. That, I've always known that, or not always, but have for a long time known that Lucifer, the character in the Bible, didn't become Satan or the devil until well after the Bible, and it
Right.
was sort of reverse engineered to make all that stuff fit. And I've known that for a while, um, but to go back and kind of get reintroduced to who Lucifer was, who was this angel, and what was the story, and that just sort of started me down this rabbit hole of like, man, there's a lot to unpack here, and it's not just the lore, but the more I'm kind of digging into this, like, I'm just I'm realizing that everyone, no matter where you're at or what culture you're in, everyone has some kind of thought or opinion about this concept of the devil.
Right.
Like, it's so universal. Um, and
Even
that,
to the point where, just like you started, the idea that of Lucifer being good never was in your reality because you already had an understanding of
mm-hmm.
what he is and what that means.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and with demon hunters, that's of course our dead gentleman zombie Orpheus property that I've been sort of co-spearheading with Jenna McMichael. Uh, she was heading up kind of the official canon lore,
Mm-hmm.
and then and the comic and whatnot, and then I was just kind of doing more of the like the cinematic and the overall like putting it together. And one of the things that we had come up with was the idea of Satan as a title,
Mm.
and the Prince of Darkness as a title, and that other beings had held the title of Satan before Lucifer and after Lucifer. Because
Nice.
Lucifer, according to the Demon Hunters mythology, had to abdicate the throne with the Treaty of Acheron. So, that's a whole fictitious thing and fun. But it was born out of this sort of notion of Satan in the Bible, and in particular, the New Testament and some of the Old, but really New Testament heavy, being, accuser or the adversary.
Right. The adversary, I was gonna say that.
Yeah. And so that in and of itself really can be a generalized term, so we were already exploring this concept of, other Satans, and Lucifer being just one of them, and how that all kind of came about. And so it's really kind of interesting. To me, it's sort of like it's coming full circle, or maybe it's coming to a head of like all this time I've been working creatively and developing with demon hunters, and I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm ready to move on from that,
Yeah.
and then I start going down this route and really jumping into the real lore from across history, and not just this Abrahamic model, and evolution of the devil. Like what is in what is the devil equivalent in all the different cultures and all the different times throughout history? Because it turns out that there are some. I mean, it's fairly universal, but with their own cultural nuances.
So give me a second. That sounds like a lot of work. I
Yeah.
mean, you are doing studies that have happened, right?
Hmm.
There are people and there are other scholars out there who have absolutely done what you've done and looked into the history and really pulled out devil and Satan and adversary and all of that. What are you going to do with this?
So, um, I haven't even really talked about the idea that I came up with, which was that I decided that I wanted to do a podcast about the devil. You know,
Nice.
I wanted to do a podcast about uh, the stuff you don't know about the devil, or things that people don't really aren't part of the mythology that people are familiar with. And then I do want to dive into things that they are familiar with and why they're familiar with that and why the evolution of that thought came to where it is now, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm reading Dante's Divine Comedy. I'm reading
Wow.
Paradise Lost. Well, I'm not yet. I'm trying to get a hold of a good copy, but the Divine Comedy, by the way, I found a translation. It is fucking gorgeous. Like, it is a beautiful poem
Yeah.
that is written just delightfully. Cindy, so we started reading it aloud to each other, and she was saying, "Gosh, this is almost a crime to read quietly in your head. Like it's
Hmm.
really meant to be read out loud." And I agree with her. It's just wonderful.
We may need to do that sometime. That might be really cool to just
Yeah.
have that recorded. I'd love to hear a
Oh
live reading
man,
of that.
it would take forever, but it would be awesome. You know. Um, but that's kind of what I was talking about. Is what I'm interested in. So I just kind of started to coalesce that thought into like, can this be a podcast, and how would I put that together? And you're not wrong. It is a lot of work. Um, and so my approach has been, of course, like, okay. So first off, I'm not a scholar, right?
Well, I mean, let's be fair. You've absolutely got a bachelor's degree and you got it in the classics. You do know how to study.
I know how to study. You're right. But I'm not. I don't have a doctorate. I don't have a master's.
Sure.
I have a bachelor's degree in classical languages. So I had 2.5 years of college level Greek and Latin. I never got any Hebrew though, and I never got any Aramaic. I was kind of hoping to pick some of that because, as you know, I was going to be a Lutheran pastor, or that was the
Right.
idea anyway, going into college. And so I was taking this as prep for seminary, which didn't happen for financial reasons, but um, it it took me down paths that were more interesting from a scholastic thought point of view, and like, how do you do it? And and so I guess you're right. I can do that kind of work. I just haven't had time and that sort
But
of
I
thing.
mean, you would not be doing what you're doing right now, even setting yourself up for the podcast, if you didn't have some sort of joy and drive
Mm,
behind it. I got to tell you, there's a couple of things that I love the idea of reading that I don't. One of them is a Dungeons and Dragons book, right? Like I like the PHPs, I love the game and all that, but I don't read those. I don't have
mm-hmm,
time for that. I cannot get my brain to think in the we're going to sit down and learn.
mm,
The fact that you have such a passionate drive that it goes you to read the Divine Comedy and to pick up the Paradise Lost and all of these other books that you've been studying, that's impressive. That for me, that says scholar, right? You have a passion for the learning of it that you're doing right now, and that's a great way to look at it.
I appreciate that. And yeah, so I mean I wrote 40 pages in my senior year on two Greek words. And
That's
I'm
not efficient.
I'm
You could
not
have just
saying, yeah, I'm not saying that my 40 pages were amazing, but it was good work. I mean, to this day, it was in line with where scholarship and lexicons were going with those two particular Greek words.
nice.
And I don't know that I really contributed anything, but it's more about like doing, reading up on the work other people have done, thinking about it, and asking questions or putting forth ideas to consider, but just like in the scientific community, you don't put forth something as fact unless it's fact, right?
Right. Yeah.
You don't. I mean, history, the classics. I think is very similar to the scientific method in that it's true until it's not. Until you uncover evidence that points to otherwise, and with this kind of material, you will find evidence that points to the otherwise that is contradictory of itself.
Hmm.
I don't know what is going on with my camera, but
You're super glitching. It's fun.
yeah. Um, but anyway, um, yeah. So
So you're making a podcast.
I'm making a podcast, and I'm doing the research that I'm doing is I'm I'm just going on Amazon, I'm going on the Google and seeing what materials I can find. I'm reading actual books. Okay, I'm going to do real research. I'm actually going to read books. I'm not just going to rely on the internet to provide me all my answers. Uh
Are you going to
Incidentally
rely
though,
on just books though? Like my thought
no.
is, like you said, there's a lot of people that wrote this, a lot of people that studied it. Are you thinking about talking with others who have studied this or others who have looked this up?
Some, yeah, absolutely. I don't know how to get a hold of some of them, so that'll be a kind of an interesting learning process as well.
Yeah.
Um, I I know how to get a hold of the author of one book that I haven't I haven't read yet. I have it. Her name is Elaine Pagels, and she is a leading scholar in Gnosticism and whatnot. And so she put
Nice.
forth a a book on the origin of Satan, and it very much goes not only just into the Christian understanding and Judaic understanding, and probably even Islam, but who is saying Satan? Who is calling something satanic?
Hmm.
And why are they saying that? And what are the repercussions of that? And what is, and I think she wants to look at the social implications of the devil. So
Nice.
I'm very excited to get into that. And I think I can get a hold of her. Whether or not she'll take an interview, I don't know. But I mean, I have contact information for her.
That's great.
I have found. Oh, I mean, and like I say, I don't want to just cover the Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian, Islamic model of Lucifer, Satan, Shaitan, whatever.
Sure.
It's like I want to go into what Satanists believe, and what they look into, and how they approach their viewpoint of Satan and Lucifer. I mean, there's different sects of Satanism. There's Luciferians, Church of Satan, Satanic Temple. All, there's diversity there. I would like to provide some light, some
Like light, not like light versus dark, but you mean like transparency and perspective.
I want to bring I want to be the light bringer, the Lucifer to the masses about Lucifer and the light bringer and Satan stuff, satanic. And so we'll get into that from that viewpoint, but then I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to look at the satanic panic and the millennia long history of accusing people of devil worship, and what is devil worship,
Right.
and does anybody actually devil worship? Are there actual, or is that just a thing that people decide to believe because they're afraid? I've listened to some podcasts and stuff that it's fascinating, and a bit scary, honestly, what even today we're capable of.
Are there other podcasts that you just mentioned you listen to some? Are there other podcasts that do something like what you're doing, that talk about the history of the devil, the origin, and the things that you may or may not know?
No, not
Wow.
specifically that way. There are podcasts that talk about the Satanic Panic. There's one exactly that it's Uncover the Satanic Panic, and it is phenomenal. It's put
Cool.
out by CBC, and it's like a 7-part episode series. And I think the episodes are 40 minutes long each or so, and it is, it's kind of like Serial, if you're
Yeah.
familiar with that kind of story building. And yeah, it's stunning, and it's stunning in that it can still happen.
Sure.
And
Yeah. The
and
fear is there, right? Fear is still fear.
yeah, so
So is blame.
so is blame, yeah, and so is accusations, the accuser, and whatnot. So let's take a break real quick, and sort of give the devil his due, kind of thing.
All right. We'll see you in a bit.
All right. So yeah, so the podcast, they come from different perspectives. Like there's one that I was just turned on to, about Jewish demonology. Like there's an entire podcast specifically devoted to Jewish demonology.
Wow.
And it's called Throwing Shade. And shade is, I think, what is that? SHEYID. Throwing. No, just D. SHEYD. And shade is a term for demon,
Oh, got it.
or
Okay.
spirit, and really
Now
kind
I
of
get it.
interesting. Yeah. So these are some Jewish people who want to talk about this stuff in hopes that it brings life a better kind of thing. And I think that's really interesting. So I haven't gone too far down that route, but I've seen it, and I'm interested in going on a hike soon, so I'll have some time.
All right. Cool.
But yeah, I didn't see anything that was really doing this specific topic, which I thought was crazy.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like something that, like I said, for all the books and all the studies that's been out there, I really would have expected that this would have been a thing. But it's great that you're doing it, right?
Yeah,
Like you're filling that need. Because I
we all
imagine there's probably going to be a good bunch of people who have been looking for something like this.
we all need the devil. Or the devil needs us,
Right.
I don't know.
Depending on who believes in who.
Right. I guess the other thing to sort of point out is, like, here's what I'm not doing, right? I am not interested in promoting any one system of belief. I'm not here to be an apologist for Satanists,
Okay.
right? I'm not here trying to defend the devil. There are some quirky podcasts out there that could be like the Devil's Advocate or something.
Is
And
that the name of one of the podcasts? Because
it
that's
might
brilliant.
be, yeah. Well, I mean, it is or it's not. I think there's been some there's some use there. I don't know what the hell is going on with my camera today. Sorry. It doesn't matter because this is an audio
You
podcast.
sound great to me. Yeah.
Anyway, um,
Awesome still shot though.
yeah, right. It's totally stoned. Um, so Devil's Advocate, I wanted to avoid that um, title because again, I'm not advocating for this character or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm not a Satanist. I'm not interested in joining a Satanist point of view or cult. I'm just really interested in the subject matter. I'm also not a Christian. You
Okay.
know, I
So
don't.
so not going the other way, not trying to vilify it or
No, yeah.
warn against it.
I don't consider myself a Christian. I haven't for a while. I sort of left that a long time ago. In fact, I left the notion of or Christian as an identity, but I still, even to this day, uh, call myself a Lutheran.
Okay.
And that's probably a subject for an entire other podcast. But I sort of describe myself as a secular Lutheran. So I'm sort of atheist, but also happen to just really enjoy Lutheranism.
Fair enough.
It's an approach. And I think one of the things that I like about, I mean, definitely one of the things that I really enjoy about Lutheranism is that at its core, it's very comfortable wrestling with and living with and dealing with paradoxes. And I think
Okay.
paradoxes are part and parcel of the truth in life. And I think, and it has nothing to do with God. It has, or whatever you want to call that. I mean, it does for Lutheran, the core Lutheran faith, but it applies to, so many other things. So, and I feel like that plays into this pursuit, right? Because, okay, so a paradox. So Luther believed in the devil, obviously. Martin Luther,
Yep.
the old monk, he believed in the devil to the point that he saw the devil while he was writing, who was trying to tempt him. And he reports, there's a famous account that he takes his inkwell and throws it at the devil, and it crashes against the wall. He was plagued so hard with this rack of guilt and torment that it sort of manifested itself in a real way for him.
Wow.
And so that's very literal
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
that point of view. And I think there are many believers today who you know can't take a literal approach to that or whatnot. And I think that's fine to a point. And part of what I want to get into here with this particular approach is, okay, so I am an atheist, but I'm also a Lutheran. I'm not a Satanist, but I respect a lot of the work that Satanists are doing, social justice wise. And, I mean, to some extent, my real basic understanding, I'm sure it's totally wrong, and I can't wait to get into figuring out the details of that. But
Hmm.
my impression of Satanism distilled to its core is libertarianism.
Okay.
Take God out, whatever. It is all about what is okay for you is okay for you, and no one should tell you otherwise. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And just take that and apply it to everything. Um, you know, there's a lot of problems with that, but
Sure.
but but like I say, there's all kinds of colors of that. So, I'm interested to dig into some of that.
So tell me, with man, you've got so many different directions you're going to be going with this.
Oh,
What are
I
you
know.
starting with? Like how do you even get to the starting point? Did you just start with Dante, or are you just going back
No,
to
no.
Lucifer? Like, are you going backwards? How's it looking for you?
Um, because I'm a classicist, like, I mean, I'll say I'm an amateur classicist because I don't have a doctorate. Um,
Sure.
I maybe I'd give myself a little bit more credit if I had a master's degree. I don't know, but I talked to somebody recently, and they said, the main thing that you want to own up to and and be okay with is like, okay, you feel like you're not an expert, but you want you truly want to study this, and you truly want to help people with this knowledge, and you want to be a sort of gateway to bring this subject to a higher level.
Right. Like I
And
said, filling the need, right? You're doing something that's not there.
yeah, and so that I'm comfortable with. And so uh given that approach, I'm just interested in going as far back as possible to figure out where these kernels started
Hmm.
and understand why they started that way, and then build up and go through time and look at different cultures throughout antiquity and what they contributed and shaped this mythology and this figure, but also in their respective religions and cultures, because they spun off into their own things. But it's also kind of looking backwards through a lens of a common perception that everybody seems to kind of have today, right? There are certain things that everybody agrees or has some ideas about the devil. Pop quiz.
To
What
me,
are
oh
yeah,
shoot. Okay.
what are some ideas or things that you know about that that is the devil for you, or that you were taught as a kid, or what is in your consciousness of what this character is?
Oh wow. Okay. So I could go really deep and talk about the Christian upbringing and the fact that I was raised in a Christian homeschool environment, so had extra biblical studies that dove in. But let me just talk about the basics of
I
Devil
just
Devil.
want real basic attributes,
Yeah, he's
basic
red.
stories, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the devil's red. He is in charge
Red.
of hell. He's the boss. May or may not have a pitchfork, depending on the era that you're talking about, or a spiky tail.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I know that he has horns. Everyone knows the devil's got
Horns.
horns. Some has wings, some doesn't, but he's definitely got horns. Probably pointy teeth and a pointy beard to go with it. But those are the ones I hear the most. Whenever I think devil, someone says I'm dressing up as the devil for Halloween. I
Mm-hmm.
go, okay, so you're red. You've got pointy horns. You got a tail.
And a
You
pointy
probably have a
goatee.
pitchfork and a pointy goatee, right? And you're mischievous or you're evil and you're
Mm-hmm.
right. It's a lot of the menacing personification of the bad guy,
The
of the one who is
malevolence, yeah.
trying to mess it up for other people.
The mustache twirling, bad guy of the 1930s, you
Right.
know, silent films and stuff.
Or the guy that lives on the left shoulder, right? You've got
Yeah.
the two things on the shoulder. You've got the angel and the devil, right? That's same guy, same outfit.
Okay. But what about Lucifer and Satan? So tell me about what you know about those.
Yeah. So Lucifer was cast out of heaven for his pride. He was an angel before, and then was cast down, and he was made the prince and principalities of the air, I think. But I remember he was a musician. He was supposed to have a lot of sound, and he was now turned into this adversary because he chose to be that way. So he is the opposite of God. So in the book of Job, he shows up and he puts God in bets, and he talks back and forth about what he could do and who he couldn't do. And then when Jesus is walking through the wilderness, he
Mhm.
approaches him again and tempts him, and constantly is giving that temptation, always trying to lure somebody into,
So he's a tempter.
yeah, to doing the things that are not what they're trying to do, right? So he's trying to tempt them away from it. Also, Lord of the Lord of Pestilence, right? Like Beelzebub, I know him by that name as
Hmm.
Lord of Flies, and so he's constantly surrounded by by pestilence, by bugs, by the things
Mm.
that are disgusting and gross of him.
Hmm.
And he is the master of others. There is another set of angels that fell with him, one
Ah,
third of heaven,
yeah.
if I recall, and they became the demons. So he is still in charge. They still follow him. They still followed him, but they are also causing uh, destruction and mayhem and temptation and tormenting humankind. And specifically during in the world, but really after the world. So after we die, there is two locations that we can go. There is the heaven, which is with God for all eternity. Everything is great and cookies and cream every day. Or there is hell, which is eternal torment and suffering based on the decisions that were made or by the choices that we made, specifically called sin on the planet. And
Hmm.
the devil is in charge, and Lucifer is in charge of keeping us in hell, and the demons doing that as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty good summary from pretty much most of the stories and pop culture. And I would say that if I asked anybody else who just listened to you, they may have little embellishes upon that, but probably would come up with a very similar thing.
Yeah.
There's a ton wrapped up in there and there is, I will tell you, there are things that go back thousands of years. There are things that go back hundreds of years.
Hmm.
There are elements of this there's what's really mind-boggling to I definitely a lot of Christians is that a lot of what you just said is not even in the Bible.
Oh wow.
There and there's going to be arguments say, "Oh yeah, there is." I mean, one thing you left out, but I know you wouldn't have if you thought about it, was the serpent in the garden
Oh right.
of
Yeah, yeah,
evil.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's very common when, Satan or Lucifer is the serpent or the snake that tempts Eve into eating the apple of wisdom, from the tree of
Yeah.
life. Interesting. There's a lot of things that build on itself that brings us to this point. And I think that if we break it out and understand why it progressed the way it did, we might have a better approach to when we encounter it, in our lives.
What is it? What do you mean? Encountering what?
Encountering the devil and in encountering so I know I kind of sound like I believe in the devil right now, but what I mean is that people's realities people everybody has their own reality. So, Marvel has a big thing right now. DC is kind of doing the same thing too. And they've done it in the comics for years of this multiverse, right?
Yeah.
There are these different versions of reality that you could have alternate, you know, versions of yourself or whatever. Well, in my opinion, in my worldview, there are a different reality for every single person living on the planet.
Hmm.
There's no purely 100% shared reality with
Interesting. Okay.
anybody else. So there's a lot of overlap, but no two people have the exact same reality. They can't.
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
because there's an internal part of that reality. So then we're going to go into what is real for all of these people. Like, what's real? Like, what is, is the devil as real as this table that I have right
Yeah.
now to some people? And the answer is yes.
Hmm.
And that informs decisions that they make. And that informs how they approach different conflicts. And I'm trying to, I don't want to say they as in an us versus them. It's just a general they that is not me.
Okay.
You're
Yeah.
part of the they,
Sure.
you know,
Outside of you.
outside of me. And so it's the demon hunter's approach. Honestly, demon hunters has shaped my worldview so incredibly. It's really I don't know if it's embarrassing or if I should be proud of that, but the conceit of demon hunters is that every story is true. All the monsters and all the gods and everything, they're all real and they're all trying to kill you or whatever. Well, mythologically, that states some truths. And where I would take that is to say, if people believe that it's real, then it's real in a reality, and that reality could cross over into yours, where you don't
Okay.
share that perception. But it may affect your life and your reality somehow. And so, in that respect,
So they enter my reality at
yeah,
that point. Okay.
yeah,
Got it.
it's a multiverse conversion situation, which happens, I mean, every day, but there are certain, I feel like some events are stronger than others or whatnot. There's certain things that change. And I think the other thing that has come to mind is this otherism that we do, which I think I'll talk a little bit more about after this break, which we should do. So let's go do that.
Right now? Okay. Let's do it. Let's go to it.
Okay, so what was I talking about?
Otherism. You're saying that there's an otherism. Talking about the us versus them as opposed to just you and all of they and how the realities
Yeah.
overlap.
Yeah. So the first episode that I'm going to do of this is going to be around the topic of evil. And I'm going to call it the faces of evil because it looks differently to different people. But evil might be a universal human experience that crosses all cultures and all times.
Hmm.
And so how do we, so I want to talk about evil and what is the nature of evil, and we're not going to define it, obviously. It's a very
Right.
nebulous thing, but we're going to play with the idea of it and what are some critical elements to that. One of the other unfortunate, I think, universal human experiences is otherism. It's us versus them. It's human versus animal. It's it's all these dichotomies that are opposite. It's life versus death. It's good versus evil.
Sure. The great conflicts. The four great
And
conflicts of story.
and what ultimately ends up happening is they overlap together and they mean the same thing in all of them.
Hmm.
So when somebody else is an other than you, they may be, you may think of them as less human, or the, I mean, and I'm not going to say you, but the well, let's talk about conservative QAnon following Republican Trump supporters, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, but okay, let's talk about them for a hot
Um,
second.
you know, it is a unfortunately larger group of people than we'd like to admit.
Yeah.
You and I both have members of that community in our families,
Yeah.
very close families, and it is it is too easy to make them an other because of what they believe, because what they believe is pretty awful. Um, and so my hope with this podcast and this pursuit is to get into an understanding or an empathy around the other, around the person who disagrees with you diametrically,
Okay.
and to understand what is evil to them. What is the devil in their worldview? And if we can understand that, well, I can't control what they believe or what they will do with this information. But if I can understand that, or if I can try and empathize with that, maybe it will influence decisions that I make in interacting with that.
Okay. So you're not looking to change the view of the person that's got a different
No.
view than you. You're just looking to understand how they got to that point for your own.
I think one of the most important things that I've uncovered in this is thinking in terms of evil. I'll give you a little bit of preview of the first episode we're going to talk about, which is the nature of evil. And I am using this book. It's called, well, you can't see it, The Devil, Perceptions of Evil from Antiquity to Primitive Christianity by Jeffrey Burton Russell. This is an amazing starting point for everything for this thing. I mean, it's pretty dense. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not too thick, but I mean, it wrestles with some pretty higher level stuff. But
A lot of brain in that one.
the opening thing is the question of evil, and how we need to grasp with this subject before we can get to the devil, because the devil is essentially the personification of ultimate evil, and that can
Right.
look differently in different contexts. But we're going to just kind of put a generic label on that, call it the devil. Might have different names in different cultures, but we're just going to say that that's what that is. But before we get there, we need to understand what evil is. And what Jeffrey Burton Russell posits is that evil is causing suffering. Let me see if I can get his actual words on this, because it's pretty
Okay.
great. It's the first sentence. The essence of evil is abuse of a sentient being, a being that can feel pain. It is the pain that matters. So the essence of evil is the abuse of others that can feel pain, causing them suffering.
Hmm.
And then it goes on to other aspects of that. And one of the biggest things about evil is that it cannot be abstract. It has to be personal. Evil has to be personal in order to really be recognized and felt. It needs to be understood as in terms of the suffering of the individual, not as a greater group. Numbers essentially dilute or bring you away from uh, the true evil. So if we talk
Hmm.
about a very common thing would be, 6 million Jews were exterminated during the Holocaust by the Nazi regime. We're going to say that's awful and
Yeah.
that's horrible, and we never want to do anything, like that again, or whatnot, and want to try and prevent that. But it's still kind of this abstract notion of something that happened back then or whatnot, or
Right.
you
That's
know,
that's a lot of people to try to, even just to try to picture,
yeah.
try to identify.
But if you learn the story of one person who has a name and a family that went through that and learn their story of going into the concentration camp, and living, hearing from their account, or you get this ability to empathize, to try and put yourself in their shoes and feel, and by means of doing that, you feel by some degree some of their suffering, right? So you
Yeah.
suffer with them. So then evil is done to you by proxy, in a
Hmm.
sense, because
Okay.
you're able to experience it, and that informs you, and that helps you take action. You know,
Yeah.
it motivates you. It changes things in a massive way. Here's This is a really violent um, example from the brothers Karamazov.
Okay.
Imagine a trembling mother with her baby in her arms, a circle of invading Turks around her. They planned a diversion. They pet the baby, laugh to make it laugh. They succeed, and the baby laughs. At that moment, a Turk points a pistol 4 inches from the baby's face. The baby laughs with glee, holds out its little hands to the pistol, and he pulls the trigger in the baby's face and blows its brains out.
Jesus, dude. All right, keep going.
I don't really think I need to. It says, I think that if the devil doesn't exist, man has created him and created him in his own likeness and image. There's a lot of atrocities throughout life and throughout history, and Russia is obviously riddled with violent and horrific histories.
Yeah.
But so's U.S. and so's Christianity, and so evil. That's evil,
That's evil.
right?
Right.
Clear, cut, evil. Um, and then we we need to think about, then, what is the devil out of that?
Because what is that, because of the personification of evil that he has become, or because of the creation of evil that has been done as the devil? Where's the connection for the two for you?
It's not for me. I'm still like diving into this and wrestling this, but as my present understanding, sorry, my present, come on,
We can
microphone.
wait. Go ahead and fix it.
This arm just wants to dip.
We're using it upside down, and it's just never
Yeah,
fair.
yeah. Okay, I think that's good enough.
All right.
Um, the where it is. So one of the reasons why we have this figure of the devil, or even demons or devils, they are manifestations or personifications of an evil external threat, alien external threat, that seeks to do you specifically harm. So we perceive when we receive evil, when we receive it, when we experience evil, it is a second nature for us to process that by personifying it, by perceiving an alien external force seeking to do you harm. Right? That is a
Yeah.
now whether or not we can resist that construct and decide that that's not what it is, and that's a whole another plane. But it's very, I think, very easy to understand how throughout time in history that is a fallback, that's an easy jump to make, that just as there is good in the universe, and we often as a people we want to attribute that to the higher God, right?
Right.
Then there must be a figure for evil. There must be some force that's outside of me
Sure.
that is doing this. And so just kind of trying to wrap our minds around the fact that this happens, and that it's happened for a long time, and that it's pretty natural, and why we do it, I think is important. And and then it brings up some questions. So, like, some of this stuff, I look at some of the very earliest on is that there was no distinct other Prince of Darkness, devil character. The God, the high God, or God, if you just want to call it God, was both good
Hmm.
and evil, had two different sides, could come in and create everything, and then the next minute, because he decided to, destroys everything. That is
Yeah.
not too unheard of when we read the Old Testament. When we read Sodom and Gomorrah, when we read some of the
Noah's Ark,
Noah's Ark, exactly.
right? Elijah. Yeah, absolutely.
There's
Hell, Garden of Eden.
mhm,
Even
for
Adam and
sure,
Eve. Yeah.
for sure. Like, it's a common theme through that, and we'll talk about the Christian lens on Judaic, scripture, and then we'll get into the Judaic viewpoint of all that too.
Yeah.
But my point is that it's familiar, and that the concept was very much the same. One thing that kind of blew my mind was that, like, polytheism, right? So, like, the Greek pantheon and the Vikings and the Egyptian pantheon and Hinduism,
Yeah.
with other many gods, are really, it's called monism, not monotheism, but monism, in that it's really one divine principle, one specific God, one divine essence, expressed in these forms of other gods,
Hmm. Okay.
right? So they have different characteristics of the one divine being, and they are gods themselves, but they are really extensions or aspects of that one God. So in D&D terms, it's an aspect. The gods are really an aspect of a singular God.
Right.
And so you have this concept, monism. So you can have monotheistic and polytheistic monism. And in much of the ancient polytheistic, each individual god had both good and evil sides to them, right? There
Right.
wasn't really one that was just purely evil, right?
Or purely good.
Or
Yeah,
purely good.
absolutely.
You know, we all know that when we study Greek mythology, that the gods were fickle, and you know, depending on the day, depending on who could see favor in you that day. Um, it was a very, very reflective of human nature, obviously. But it wasn't until another certain period where um, this crazy idea that maybe there's another principle, there's another being that's separate from the high God, that's separate from, you know, the good, that that because what really kind of gets into people's issues with this apparently is that they're really uncomfortable with the idea that God is responsible for evil.
Sure, because at least in the Judeo-Christian, he created everything, right? He
Yeah.
was the creator of it all. So that means that he had to create the bad as well.
Yeah. But they're really uncomfortable with the notion, a age old question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God allow evil to happen? What and all these attempts to try and explain that um, is really unsatisfactory and kind of just doesn't really explain it very well. Well,
Yeah.
one way to explain it is that you take away God's omniscient power and say, okay, God isn't really responsible, and God does not actually have control over everything. There is another being that has control and power and autonomy, and they are at odds with each other. But there is another power, and so that sort of absolves the high God of any responsibility for evil because there's this other thing. But it takes away the omnipotence. And Christianity and Judaism and the monotheistic Abrahamic faiths are not comfortable with that.
Right.
They're not ready to come forward and say there's another God, but they are willing to kind of almost get there.
Powerful, just that all powerful.
Yeah. So
That's
it's a lot.
interesting, man. That's going to be a lot. I'm really excited about this. What's it going to be called? What are you calling this?
The devil you don't know.
Nice.
I'm going to call it the devil you don't know. And I'm as you can as I'm rambling and spewing forth all the research that I've been brewing in my brain, um, I've been trying to think about the structure of this podcast and what it's supposed to sound like. How are people going
Yeah.
to listen to this? What is that experience going to be like? And I totally get that there's going to be moments where people's eyes are going to glaze over, and that's why I need people like you, and I've asked Emily Kwan, who some of our fans will recognize as Emily Olsen from the Gamers franchise.
Fantastic.
So she's going to join us as a co-host, and I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm going to present some of the research and findings, and then you folks will engage with that and ask questions and make it less boring.
De-nerdified a little bit, or who knows,
Yeah,
maybe add nerding.
ad nerding, yeah. But I think that I just have this massive tendency to overthink everything, and so I want to like create this sort of structure of what each episode is going to be like, and I get tripped up because of self-imposed limits or whatnot. So in general, I think of this as kind of like sort of like this, sort of like what you and I have been doing just now,
Yeah.
where I've done a bunch of research and I spew forth that sort of in a sort of book report kind of thing.
You share the things you've learned and why they're exciting, and I ask further questions.
Yeah. And there's reaction, and maybe, there's other additions to that. Um, but other things that I want to do is I mean, I think that's kind of a core. But other features is I want to do interviews with actual subject matter experts that, you know, know way more about this particular end of things than I do or we do, and
Yeah,
have us have the opportunity to ask them questions. Um,
that
so
sounds great.
I'm
This
starting to
is
think that maybe those are different episodes, right?
yeah,
So like
probably.
we'd have one episode that's just kind of me doing my sort of book report thing, and then we could have another episode where it's an interview, and
Yeah,
I don't know. There's just as you can see, there's so much to cover.
there's a lot. Yeah, depending on where your brain goes, and the idea of acknowledging, identifying, and then sharing the different concepts of people's versions of evil and their impacts and the reactions to them is not a small feat. So doing that even through the one lens of speaking about individual reactions to and experiences of the devil and where those come from is a real interesting idea and concept. But it is, I mean, cut yourself a little bit of slack. It's going to be a lot. That's a big task to take on. So it's going to be a good journey. It's going to be a fun ride to see where that goes and how you change specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can't control how other people change, but to see your experience of what you go through by having these conversations in education, it's going to be real exciting.
Yeah, it will be unique, and I do plan on fully expecting my mind to be changed on many subjects. you know, I'm open to that. But already before I've even recorded episode one, uh, kind of what you just laid out, I've already changed my mind about how this is going to be, because I thought it would just be a limited series of maybe 20 episodes,
Mm-hmm.
and it would just be like done, and off you go. Well, the more I dive into it, the more ongoing it becomes. And
Yeah.
certain episode topics that I come up with really need several episodes to cover. So
So hold
yeah,
on. When is it? When's this all starting?
I don't
When are we
know.
looking for? Okay, cool.
you know, uh, I I need to pull together. I need to pull together and write an outline for the first few episodes, I think is where I'm at. And right now I'm working
Okay.
on the first episode. But if I do that and then go record it, I feel like we're going to wait too long before we can do the next one.
Hmm.
Right. So I do feel like I need to do a bit more upfront research and writing out in a kind of block.
Yeah.
So the soonest I could see us actually recording episode one would be in September.
Okay.
But as far as a release time, I don't really know, because what I would really like to do is record a bunch all at once. Not necessarily at once, but record them in a block. Do that sort of thing, and
Yeah.
then release them on a weekly basis or maybe a daily basis. Some kind of drip basis to
Sure.
give us more time. Then, like, that's often released. Now we have time to work on the next phase,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the sort of leading, lagging.
Yeah, it's a smart move, right? Like make sure you really have your topics down and ready to go, then put them all together so that you can release the story episodically. That's the way we used to do it in the industry. So I absolutely get it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, hey, I'm looking forward to it. I think this is going to be a fun journey.
I've been really surprised by the reaction of people's interests, in this topic.
Yeah.
It does seem to be pretty. I don't want to say universal, but it piques a lot of people's interest, no matter where your background is. They're
It's
very interested to know where I'm going to go with this.
Devil's a fantastic character, and it has been in literature for super long time. You probably know that more than I do. He's been around for a really, really long time, so there's always going to be some sort of fascination, interest to it. Um, yeah, so
There's
I'm glad that you're doing all the research so that I don't have to, but I'm
Yeah,
excited to be in the conversation.
absolutely. There is one thing though that I want to say before we sign off, that I kind of need your help with,
Okay.
and that is that when you and I'm this is stemming from my research into the Satanic Panic. Real brief primer: a uh, a bunch of people were accused of ritual child sexual abuse
Hmm.
during the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, totally.
And it turns out nearly all of them were false. But if you are accused of child sexual abuse, um, even if you're innocent, like there's not a lot of coming back from that.
Yeah, that would tend to follow you. The fear is so strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's one of
absolutely.
the primary core evil acts or accusations that you could also possibly be accused of ever. And so many people were falsely accused of this, and it just absolutely destroyed their lives.
Mm.
Because enough people in a certain level of hysteria and fear was too accessible,
Sure.
that
Yeah.
it was just easy to buy into it. Well, as you can imagine, I'm a person who is, I've already said I'm an atheist. Even though I say I'm not a Satanist, I'm studying the devil and
Yeah.
talking about it. Um, I shaved my head, so I'm pretty
You did?
Aryan. Pretty Aryan looking right now.
Okay.
Um, accusations could come, if this particular type of thing uh, takes off, better or worse. I am afraid of, or I have some fear of potential backlash and what that, from an extreme standpoint, could look like.
Okay.
And
I
I'm
understand that. I don't feel it, but I absolutely understand where you're
yeah,
coming from. Yeah.
and I'm gonna go forward with it anyway,
Good for you.
because and I'm gonna go forward with the sort of subtle art of not giving a fuck kind of situation of just trying to compartmentalize and let people's beliefs be their beliefs and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie that there is a sneaking, aching fear way back in my reptilian brain of if the situation gets beyond my control, what that could do. And it's a subject matter that could be easily done. I'm hoping that we live in a time where that's much easier to diminish.
Sure.
But
What's the favor that you were starting with? You wanted to ask something of me.
my the favor was just kind of like, what what do you see? What are things that you can think of that could maybe put that at ease, or um, are there safeguards we could do? I mean, I'm probably going to do a disclaimer at the beginning of each episode anyway, um, but maybe not. Maybe it doesn't need it. Maybe fuck it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, The It's an interesting question because the idea of having a disclaimer is definitely one that shows up for, make your own opinions, do not follow my advice. Don't do this at home, kids, right? That's the first thing I think of when I think of disclaimers coming up. We are or are not medical professionals, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
The idea of going into a historical study with the direct conversation about it being a we'll say scholarly insight or scholarly dive into the thoughts of evil and the personification of what evil is to many cultures and times, it doesn't feel like it's something that needs a disclosure because you're no longer coming from the perspective of trying to pitch something. You're not trying to convince anyone of anything. And you're not even at this point talking about your own experience or what it is for you or what it means. Yeah. You're just talking about what it is that you see. And so on that level, everyone has opinions. Everyone's always going to have opinions, but it doesn't mean that you need to defend anyone's opinion in one way or another. So I think the idea of saying, come join me on this journey and this study of what I'm doing and make up a decision for yourself the same way I'm going to, I think is great. I think that would be more than enough.
Cool. Well, thank you. I think that is what I'm hoping to certainly do. And and I'm going to put some faith into that's going to turn out okay,
Good.
I think that'll work, as far as what I can do with that. Because ultimately it does come down to what can you control.
Right? Exactly.
You can't control other people's perceptions. You can control what you do with them.
Right. Exactly.
So,
cool. Yeah, good call.
Well, thank you. That's all I got today.
That was a lot. You did good.
That was a lot.
I'm excited about the follow-up from this, and we'll have our conversations before, but like the next steps and where it's going next. I'm excited to start hearing this and seeing how it comes out. So
yeah,
thanks, Don. I appreciate this.
Thank you for listening to The Early Effect. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. If you are enjoying what you hear, please consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/DonEarly. That's patreon.com/DONEARLY. I release the episodes early and you get exclusive content and get to be my sounding board. I don't know what we're talking about next week. It'll be a surprise. Don't worry, I have a list. This is my sign-off.